All right, so we'll get started, and there may be a few other people who will join us, and I'm happy to have them enter whenever they're able to, and we are recording the session, as you will have seen, and so we'll be able to share that recording as we usually do with everyone. So my name is Nadine Trépanier-Bisson. I'm the Director of Professional Learning at the Ontario Principals Council, and I'm really pleased to bring to you today our wonderful team of principal leaders, as well as our expert, Chris Sertam, for this last professional learning network around the destreamed grade 9 math and how we can lead the implementation. So the topic that we've chosen to discuss specifically for this PLN as a result of the feedback that we've received in other sessions is around supporting teachers with assessment. So as usual in the PLNs, what we've planned is a fairly short presentation and then some time for discussion in breakout rooms. And so that's what we'll do, and we'll get started. And just as we do that, it's really important for us to acknowledge the land. So you see a land acknowledgement there on your screen. The first bullet is for when we're based in Toronto. I'm actually in Ottawa today, so I am not on those lands. I am actually on the lands, the ancestral traditional land, ceded Indigenous territory of the Algonquin people. So I want to acknowledge that land. Specifically, feel free in the chat to add and share the lands on which you are, because people are able to join from all over Ontario, and so you may be on different lands than what's on the slide or what I've just shared. Feel free to share that in the chat. And I think the second bullet is really an important one. It's important to me, and I think shared with my colleagues on this call. As educators, we do have a duty to learn, understand, and redress the historical and ongoing impacts of colonialism. We have a responsibility individually and collectively, so as organizations, to reconcile our relationship with the land and peoples. And I think that's important. And one way that I do that is to continue to participate in my own learning and continue to have conversations with Indigenous community members, continue to read, and also to look at how I can bring professional learning to the members of the Ontario Principals Council in regard to those impacts and to redressing those historical contexts and understanding what we can do in our schools to build relationships with our Indigenous community partners. Luciana, I don't know if you wanted to add something, or as we're going to turn it over to the team.
I think I'm good. Welcome and thank you to everyone.
All right, and I think we're turning it over to the team for the next little bit.
I got this slide, so welcome on behalf of everyone. We're happy to have you join us today. As Nadine said, we're going to be talking about sound assessment and looking at some assessment practices. And as we get into the conversation, we'd like to focus in on three really big ideas. And that's the idea of exploring assessment as ongoing and embedded in instruction, and looking at how can we promote and encourage a variety of assessment strategies. And then we're going to wrap it up by talking a lot about how do we put it all together? What are some strategies to help teachers to do that? So as we talk about each area, we'll have some conversation and hear from you and get that conversation going. So I'll turn it over to the next slide.
Thanks. Welcome, everybody. It's great to see you here. I know you've got so many things on your plate these days. This is just a reminder of the components of sound classroom assessment. And I think it's even more important when we're talking about destreamed classrooms to be focused on some of these particular aspects. We know that the first one on the list is that sound classroom assessment is used to improve teaching and learning. And that comes from all of the assessment research literature, but we also know it's a strong message in the elementary math curriculum, the grade 9 math curriculum, as well as in the document that we've been working with for quite some time, the Growing Success document. And that has to be first and foremost. Some of the other aspects that we need to think about are that it needs to be ongoing and embedded in instruction. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but assessment is not an event. It is something that occurs all the time, and especially important, again, in a destreamed classroom where we're trying to pay attention to make sure we have culturally relevant pedagogy, which of course includes assessment. Using a variety of assessment strategies, we'll focus on what that might look like in a destreamed math classroom, and how to pay attention to student thinking in the different kinds of ways that they think. It should be aligned with curriculum and instruction. So again, since assessment is not an event and embedded in instruction, it should look like instruction. If we're having students work in groups on a problem-solving task, then how can we incorporate that kind of collaboration within assessment? It also needs to focus on meaningful mathematics, not the mathematics that's the easiest to assess, but the mathematics that's most important to assess. I say it's putting your money where your mouth is. By what we assess, we're telling kids what we value about mathematics. And also, again, particularly, this is true for all classes, but particularly for destreamed classes, including students in the assessment process, so that they are constantly reflecting and knowing where they stand, not in terms of the rest of the class necessarily, but in terms of the progress that they're making throughout their learning. Next slide.
Just figured out I was muted. Thank you, Chris. Before exploring the three big ideas that Dee and Chris talk about, let us start with a kind of a little brief review of assessment. We've been talking about assessment for more than 10 years since Growing Success document and curriculum document. As Chris mentioned, the primary purpose of the assessment, it's not advancing, the primary purpose of assessment and evaluation is to improve student learning. So we all know that the Ontario curriculum, it doesn't matter if it is elementary, secondary, old, new, and every subject defines assessment as the process of gathering information that reflects accurately how well the student is achieving the curriculum expectation. So it's based on curriculum expectation, as Chris mentioned, and the achievement levels. And then this information that is gathered through assessment is used by teachers to determine students' strength and areas for improvement in their achievement of the curriculum for each course. And also assist teachers, again, as Chris mentioned, to reflect on overall effectiveness on their classroom practices so they can revise, adapt according to the student needs. And so assessment for the purpose of improving students' learning is called formative assessment. And in lots of literature, and then especially in the curriculum and Growing Success document, this is considered as both assessment for and as learning. And assessment for learning, as we mentioned before, is a process of seeking and interpreting evidence for the teachers and students to use to decide where the students are in their learning and where they need to go and how best to get there. So those are the three major steps. And the assessment, formative assessment, is in two types: assessment for learning, as we said, and it can be diagnostic. So it happens, it's non-evaluative, it occurs before the instructions, let's say before teaching a new concept, before a unit, before a course. Then and then teachers collect this data and determine student readiness, and they actually identify what students already know and are able to do, the skills from a previous concept or previous year or previous unit, and so they can plan instructions accordingly. So, and it can be also ongoing. It occurs, that is called again a formative assessment. And this is to monitor student progress toward achieving the overall and specific and expectation. So also, formative assessment can be as assessment as learning. And this is assessment that actually build capacity, students' capacity over time to be their own best assessor. So again, this is non-evaluative and it occurs ongoing during the instruction, and is used by students to provide feedback to other students, which is peer assessment, but also is used by students to monitor their own progress, that so they can reflect and make adjustment and set individual goals. So in addition to formative assessment, of course, is summative assessment. And it's just unfortunate that lots of teachers actually think that assessment is just this assessment, summative assessment, which is the assessment of learning. And that assessment becomes public, and it is used to make a judgment. It assigns a mark, a value to the students. Of course, it's based on achievement chart and all this and curriculum expectation. And again, can be used to inform teachers about their instruction and classroom practices.
So again, coming back to that idea of assessment as ongoing and embedded in instruction, it really is thinking about, and I often work with teacher candidates or new teachers to think about what kinds of questions will I ask in class that will prompt and probe student thinking. I don't just mean the math questions, but as students are working in a whole class discussion, in a small group discussion, or if a teacher listens over the shoulder to a student working or notices what kinds of thinking that is occurring, how will they respond? How will they pose a question? How will they listen to that student thinking? All too often, some of our questions that teachers ask might be sort of a low-level question that doesn't actually elicit that thinking. So it's actually hard to act on that kind of thinking. It's more a check-in, did they get it? But what we really want to do is ask those kinds of questions that help to get to student thinking, so that the teacher can help to move that student thinking with the kinds of questions they ask next. So on the next slide, you'll see that I have a variety of types of questions. And many of these questions have come from some of the research that I've done in analyzing transcripts of teachers who are excellent actually at prompting and probing that student thinking, and to really look at the kinds of, what are the types of teacher questions. So it could be, they might be a kind of question where they're just suggesting that they look again at their work, where they're encouraging their thinking. They might pose a new challenge. They might ask them to explain their thinking. And I've given you a few examples there. So things like promoting group interaction. Could you explain to Jason what you did? Or one of my favorite questions, why does that make sense? That's a wonderful question. I almost think every new teacher should get that tattooed on there, right by their wrist. And when they're stuck, they could just have a look at it. Oh yeah, that's my good question. So really to help teachers to think ahead of time, what are the kinds of questions I might ask in my whole class discussion as I circulate and observe groups working, that helps to move their thinking along without taking away their thinking. We see all too often teachers are too quick to jump in and erase the student thinking and replace it with the teacher thinking. But what's most important is to value that student thinking and to help the student build on the ways that they're thinking rather than replace it with the student thinking. Next slide.
So to capture assessment as ongoing and embedded instruction, so we can say that assessment is more than a test, and it is a tool actually to guide teaching and enhances learning, as was mentioned, must be equitable and fair for all students. And assessment is a tool that builds a common understanding of success for all students. And it provides, as we mentioned many times, evidence of learning through multiple and different ways. And it focuses on understanding. It promotes collaborative and sharing of ideas and strategies so students can work in groups. And it informs the classroom structures. But when the teacher applies effective assessment strategies, then the student will be able to take ownership of their own learning. So, and develop those independent skills that we actually mark through the achievement chart. So they tend to like mathematics more, and therefore they will become more confident in doing mathematics. So they will develop effective skills to solve mathematical problems. Also, they will start to look for different ways how to approach a task, to solve problems, how to answer questions, and so on. So even asking questions, and I've noticed this when I was teaching math at the beginning of the semester or the end of the semester, I could see a huge growth, and I'm pretty sure all the math teachers can attest to this, to the way that students are approaching mathematics, the way the questions were articulated and formulated. They were more accurate and to the point. So then, of course, they will develop flexibility in their thinking about mathematical concepts and how to represent concepts in different ways.
Teachers created, they were in part of a project with Laura Ginny Newman, as just an example to show how assessment could be ongoing and through instruction. And here at the start of a unit on geometry and measurement, they posed this sort of overarching question about designing a design task where they had to create or choose a design for a specific purpose. And here there's the drink container, and the class together created some criteria. And then throughout the instruction, each day they looked at different shapes, and this is an example of one shape here, and considered whether that would be a suitable container based on their criteria. So students were assessing and teachers were giving feedback along the way. And then at the end of the unit, students had a whole bunch of containers to choose from, and they rated the containers, decided which one would be the best. And they had all this ongoing dialogue, so they were ready and able to share their best ideas and their solutions. And I'll share some more details of this example in the chat room. I'll put in a link.
So what we're going to do in a minute is we're going to move into 3 breakout rooms, and we're going to do that just for a brief period. I would say about 5 to 7 minutes, because I think it's really important that, this is a professional learning network. We need to have these conversations with one another to find out, for instance, how are you helping to, to support teachers to ensure in this particular case that assessment is ongoing, embedded in instruction. So how have you been able to do this with your implementation of the new grade 9 math curriculum? What do you see as still some questions and challenges that we have to address? Because others might have some answers in terms of doing that. So we're going to go into the breakout group for a brief period. Then we're going to come back again, talk about one of the other topics, such as a variety of assessment strategies, and again, move to the breakout group. So just so that you have a sense of where we're going with this. So I believe the breakout rooms are going to be set up randomly.
Yes, I'm just going to open them now and you should be able to join.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Well, so that the first big idea that we have selected for you. So the second one is so using a variety of assessment strategies. And although we already mentioned some of the strategies.
So when we think about using a variety of assessment strategies, we often think about the first 2 reasons that I have here. And these reasons are particularly important in destreamed classes. So things that using a variety of assessment strategies really recognizes that students demonstrate their learning in different ways. And if I want to see their learning, I have to give them those opportunities to show those in different ways. Also, using that variety gives them multiple opportunities to show what they know and can do. So that on one particular day, it may be an off day, I may not be able to see what they know and can do, but on another day I can. But a third reason that I think is also important is that we need to use a variety of assessment strategies to be able to capture the complex processes of doing mathematics. So mathematics, if I look, for instance, at the verbs within the curriculum, the verbs take on all kinds of things: demonstrate, graph, compare, investigate, calculate, explain. Those are all a variety of different mathematical actions that are in the curriculum that I need to be able to see students doing. And seeing is not always necessarily a paper and pencil test. It could be through observation, through me sitting down with a group of students and having a conversation. And also, as well as that curriculum mandating that I need a variety of assessment strategies because of the complexity, I also look at the processes that are in the mathematics curriculum. Students are to communicate, problem solve, select tools and strategies, reason and prove. So in order to actually assess the current curriculum, I need to have a variety of assessment strategies. It's actually a necessity. So if we move to the next slide, Barbara, I think will speak next.
I'm still muted. Thank you, Chris. And in the previous slide, Chris talked about the why using a variety of assessment strategies is so important, why using actually assessment is so important. And I have to tell you, Chris, that every time you talk about the mathematical education and any topic, I feel like a student that want to learn, and it's so beautiful. So in this slide, talking about we're going to talk about the variety of one of the formative assessment strategies. Dylan William, in his book, Embedded Formative Assessment, discusses 5 key strategies that support the implementation of effective formative assessment. And very commonly, William presents these ideas in this helpful table that I'm shortly going to explain to you. So he links the strategies to core assessment concept. And the first, it's coming. The first strategy that William talks in his book is clarifying, sharing, understanding, and understanding learning intentions. So William in his book says that if you don't know where you're going, you'll never get there. And absolutely, this relates to the curriculum planning. So he actually, in that small clarifying, sharing, and understanding learning section, he talks about learning intention. Means that what do we want all students to know and be able to do? It also means what does the success look like, or what does the excellence look like? So this connects to the idea of assessment, and then of course teachers knowing the curriculum. And then the first part of the program, clarifying, understanding, and sharing, that relates to teachers and students and all their peers, all need to know both the knowledge requirements and the criteria of excellence or the success, right? So this is about the self-regulation and metacognition. So the student will be good at self-regulation and planning, monitoring, and so the whole thing, this first key strategy means getting students to really understand what their classroom experience will be and how their success will be measured. So it involves the teachers, peers, and the students or learner. So the second one in William's book is in engineering effective classroom discussions, activities, and learning tasks that elicit evidence of learning. So at the center, if you see carefully, is in a cell 2-2, if I can describe it mathematically. At the center of this is the idea of the responsive teaching. So instructional teaching has to be highly interactive, William says, so that teachers are getting the feedback from their students. So then they can reflect and adapt and revise their curriculum so they can implement effective classroom instructional strategies. And it involves as many students as possible. And then William focuses, and Chris mentions this many times, on question design, the need for checking for understanding and asking lots of questions in a probing style. So the third key strategy is providing feedback that moves learning forward. And then teachers should work with students to provide feedback to them. And this should be as a tool, and we mentioned in the beginning, to improve student learning. So then feedback is only successful if the student learning improves, because otherwise, why use it? Therefore, teachers can use formative and summative assessment that we mentioned in the beginning. The fourth strategy of formative assessment that is mentioned in Williams' book is active learners as instructional resources for one another. So teachers should develop kind of strong classroom practices and routine where students can support each other's learning. And then the last one is activating learners as owners of their own learning, and kind of mentioned this. So then teachers should apply classroom tools and structures to enable students to be able to monitor themselves and regulate their own learning. So owning your own learning is at the heart of the self-regulation and metacognition. So then teachers can help students to know where they are going and where they are in this curriculum journey. So if a student knows for themselves what they need to do in order to improve, then of course they will begin to build their confidence, have a positive growth mindset, improve their self-regulation, and of course this will result in the academic success.
So again, I do a lot of research around assessment, and this is just a bit of a list of some of the assessment practices that I've seen in Ontario classrooms that teachers have been doing or talked about in focus groups or brought samples of student work. And, you probably have seen some of these kinds of things as well. So I know, for instance, sometimes if we have a teacher who's kind of fairly traditional and really is kind of assessing with mainly a unit test, getting them to start to do things like using quizzes as a formative assessment to provide feedback rather than marks, I find is a starting point. But I see so many other creative things like using math journals as feedback for the teachers and students, similar to exit cards, performance tasks with collaborative components. That's an assessment performance task. Students actually recording their thinking on an iPad or on a Chromebook so that they're talking through their problem solving, or teachers taking snapshots when students are working on vertical non-permanent surfaces, whiteboards, or videos of the student work as they're explaining their thinking. So there are many different ways that teachers have found to capture student thinking. I know, for instance, in our breakout group that I was in this morning, we were talking about how many teachers have come up with some unique ways to do that when they were in online learning. And I know I've even had teachers question, after trying out many different ways to capture student thinking in an online format, they started to question, well, when we go back to face-to-face, which they did, do we really need tests, or are there other ways to capture student thinking? So there are a variety of different ways, and I'm sure that you'll be sharing some of those as well, things you've seen and ways that you've helped teachers start to incorporate different types of assessment practices. Okay, I'll turn it over to Dee, I think.
Or just sort of a different way to do assessment. This is a grade 9 teacher. It was actually a unit on proportional reasoning, and he created his summative task first. He had sort of 10 rich tasks that he gave to students on the first day of the unit. And then he continued to teach like he would normally teach his unit. He did use a vertical surface approach, but he did similar types of problems, and students worked in groups. And as he went through the unit, students had a copy of those summative problems, and at any time that they felt they could present their solution, they were encouraged to do that. They worked on them during their consolidation time, they worked on them for homework, and when they were ready, they arranged a time with the teacher. It might have been during some work time in class, it might have been at lunch or after school, and they talked with their teacher about the question they wanted to present. They could do it written, they could write on the board, they could discuss it, and the teacher was kind of had some hints questions ready so he could sort of probe the student to make sure that they had done that question and understood it. And it was sort of an ongoing assessment. And what happened was students, afterwards, because it was kind of an experiment, they reported that they really liked that opportunity of having choice to do the assessment when they were ready and to do maybe one piece at a time. And they actually really liked the probing questions. They were, excited to see what the teacher was going to ask them about the question. And the teacher reported that they really felt like they had an understanding of where their students were or where their misunderstandings were, as opposed to just that test at the end that they couldn't necessarily, offer correction. And so as students were presenting each time, they really got a sense of what the student's understanding was, and they felt like they could really give good feedback to move the student forward so that as they continued the assessment, they were doing better as they went along. And this is just another example. This is from been trying to figure out a way to incorporate the resource department so they can support the students. And so in this particular example, the teacher, still feeling the need to have a test, creates a practice test and divides it into different sections, and then gives it to the students as a practice, as a formative thing. And then the day the teacher gives it back, the resource folks come in to help, and she's designed the room so that there are different setups for the different parts of the test, and students get some choice. If they struggled in section 1 of the test, they can go work at station 1. If they struggled more in section 5, they can go work at station 5. And it allows her to do that small group instruction with students in the areas that they need. And it's a great way to incorporate the resource staff because they can all be at a station and students can get the support to help them and to review the content and to have those rich conversations and more importantly, that one-on-one instruction.
Well, thank you, Dee. At this time, we will move into the second breakout room to discuss the second question. How do I help teachers use a variety of assessment strategies? And to guide that discussion, we have two kind of little question. How have you responded to this question with your implementation? And what question or challenges or dilemmas you still have? So if we can go to 3 other for a breakout room for about 5 to 6 minutes or 7 minutes, that would be great. We're coming back again because we have the third big idea, how to put all this together. And of course, Chris will take that over.
All right, the breakout rooms are open. You can join.
So many great ideas I find generated in these breakout rooms. They're, in a sense, they're all too short, but it's kind of nice. We've got to kind of be snappy there with sharing our ideas, but I'm hoping some of you are making some good connections with one another to follow up. I know that there were some great connections in my last group. So I want to talk a little bit about putting it all together. So although teachers may do many things that we actually have talked about, they're often challenged by the idea of putting all the assessment data together and thinking about how do I come up with a mark on a report card. I'm going to talk about that just very briefly. So on the next slide, I want us to think about different ways to think about assessing the learner. And actually, Varvar, you could kind of click the next thing so that that circle comes up, and the next one. Thanks. So a long time ago, we had norm referencing, which was, the bell curve, and people were compared to one another. Some of us have probably experienced that in some standardized testing. And then we have moved to what we currently use, which is really criterion reference. So in other words, this is level 3. This is the criteria you need to get level 3. And we talk about words like targets and getting to the target and success criteria. So you can see we're very focused on criterion referenced, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I think sometimes we need to also think about self-referencing. So in other words, that is, because we have some students who we might set up the learning goal for that class, we might set up the success criteria, and that student's never quite hitting it. Does that mean they're not successful? No way in the world. If their thinking has moved from where it was at the beginning of that lesson to where their thinking is now, they are successful. So this idea of self-referencing, I think, is extremely important when we're talking about a destreamed class, and that we support students and encourage students by saying, wow, last week I saw that you were struggling with that idea, but look at what you're doing now. So that we really can help to think about where is the student now compared to where they were. And I think that we really need to kind of help to support teachers to provide those kinds of comments to students, provide those on report cards, provide that in their formative assessment, so that it's not completely about hitting the target, because they might miss the target. But they might always be getting closer and closer. And so we need to be helping them to think about that. On the next slide, I want to share with you a display. So this is taken from a teacher, it's actually grade 10, but it doesn't really matter. And it's a piece of software that the school board that this teacher is in actually had developed. And you're just seeing a screenshot, but this actually is usually live and the teacher can gather a lot more information. Along the left-hand side, we have the overall expectations, and what we have across the top are the different levels. We have different dots on there, or circles, that represent a variety of different things. So actually, the things that start with OB are observations. The things that are TK are tasks, and the things that are just Ts are tests. And so a couple of things I want you to notice. One might be that, for instance, OB5, a particular observation, and by the way, the teacher has also formative assessment. So these are things that the teacher has recorded. They perhaps were a bit more formal. Observation 5, we see actually, I'll say, hit 3 different overall expectations. So the teacher gathered evidence. And also, although what you're seeing is static, when the teacher clicks on these dots in the live one, the teacher gets all of her notes. So in other words, if she were to click on TK1, she would get the date, what this task was, any notes that she might have taken about the student, or maybe has a screenshot of what the student did on that particular task. And so we can see many different things here. We can see, for instance, that there's a variety of assessment strategies, that one particular assessment could, I'll say, hit several different overall expectations. And the other important thing is that the teacher then uses this with the student. So actually, throughout the term, the teacher sits down and she and the student look at this together. And so the student might say, observation 5 for A4, it looks like level 1, but look at, for observation 6 and all my other things, I'm closer to a level 2 or level 3. So it's a conversation that the student has with the teacher. And in fact, sometimes the teacher has what Dee referred to as do-overs. In other words, you know what, I think I get this now. Can I maybe have another task, or can I have another way to provide evidence that I actually know this? And so, sometimes people look at this and say, so what mark did the kid get? I can't tell you, because I am not that teacher. The teacher uses all of the notes, their professional judgment, the conversations with the students to be able to put this assessment data together, looks at what's most recent, and really thinks about the student's achievement on each of those particular curriculum expectations. So I kind of like this because it's real, and it is within a school board. And so they would have this page for each of the students to be able to talk about it. It helps us to get away from thinking about averaging marks, to be thinking about how do teachers use their professional judgment, and to have some of those different kinds of ideas. So yes, the software was made by the school board. I'm just answering some of the questions in the chat. Yeah. Okay, I'll hand this over to Dee, I think.
We're going to move into breakout group again, and just kind of thinking about Chris's example and thinking about what you've seen in your school board. What are some of those strategies that you as a administrator or as a curriculum consultant, what have you done to really help teachers find ways to bring that data together, not do the whole test quiz and average it out, but to bring that data together in a destreamed classroom so that it's fair and meaningful evaluation of the students. So if we could go back to our breakout rooms for another 5 minutes or so.
We're all back, I think.
Yeah, we are all back. So before we close this, we really would like some feedback from you, and it was a great conversation. At least three breakout session. I was fortunate to have the same group, and we had some great discussion, and I'm pretty sure you guys shared the same discussion. So please use the chat to put the main ideas over there about the learning and what you still want to learn in the future. And I don't know how so is there a link that they are going to click to give us feedback? But in the next few days, you are going to be offered to, or probably today, to give us feedback. We really want to know. And you can put this in a chat as well. Chris, you're up.
So just before we wind down, and I do think the next 2 slides will have some links for feedback, and we really would appreciate the feedback. But I think I just want to emphasize that really valuing and building on student thinking is really at the heart of equitable teaching and learning. And when we say equitable, that's a term that I use. We really do mean, culturally relevant pedagogy. We mean pedagogy that takes into account the diversity that we have in the classroom. Diversity, we know in grade 9 can be all kinds of things, size, maturity, intellectual maturity, all kinds of different things that we know that is such a great period of transition. And the whole point is that really all students are capable mathematics learners. And what we need to be able to do is to value the ways in which they think and to support that. And I think that we really can do that through assessment. So if we go to the next slide.
Have some resources, and you'll get all these links. I'm sure Brad will send you the slideshow afterwards. But we've included some of the work from Laura Ginny Newman around those thinking problems in the math class, those tasks that, those critical thinking opportunities that you can embed through your assessment and instruction, and some work from Jenny Donahue and Stephen Katz that really helps with the implementation and giving strategies on how you can work with your teachers. We talked a lot about mind shift. I know certainly in our breakout group about the mind shift teachers need to make in terms of their assessment, and there's a graphic there to help think about what that mind shift will look like. And Christina shared her paper with all that research that she's done around assessment, and of course, growing success is a Bible that we always go back to when it comes to assessment. And then our last slide has those links to the feedback forms, and they're also in the chat room if you can take a few moments to give us some feedback. We really want to say thank you for joining us on this journey through all of the PLNs and through the webinar around implementing the new grade 9 destreamed math course. It's been fun, and we've learned just as much from you and all the great examples that you share. I take notes every single time, and then my teachers know, okay, what'd you get? Like I'm running to tell them all the things I learned from other people and what's happening around the province. So on behalf of our group, I'd like to say thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's all true. Yeah, thank you.
Over to
So just a quick close then. Again, thanks for taking the time today. Our group, we can stay on for just a minute to debrief. It has been a pleasure. Kudos to everyone involved, both presentation team and participants. These sessions are really quite remarkable. I hope everyone has a great day. Please take good care of yourselves.
Thank you, everybody.